Welcome to Top 7 Trends in Corporate Performance Management, presented by Perficient and FEI. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, I would like to share some information regarding CPE credits with you. I appreciate your patience. Today's webinar is worth 1 CPE credit. To be eligible for CPE credit, you must answer at least 3 of the 4 polling questions during the webinar and have a total viewing time of at least 50 minutes. Participants will have the opportunity to download their CPE certificate immediately following the webinar if above requirements are met. In accordance with the standards for the National Registry of CPE Sponsors, CPE credit will be granted based on a 50-minute hour. We are unable to grant CPE credit in cases where technical difficulties preclude eligibility. CPE program sponsorship guidelines prohibit us from issuing credit to those not verified by the technology to have satisfied the minimum requirements listed above. After this presentation, the webinar will be available on the FEI member site, where you can replay it and download. At the end of the webinar, you can retrieve your certificate in the certification widget. Below the resources widget is the Q&A box. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, and the presenter will answer as many questions as he can. And now it is FEI's pleasure to introduce our presenter for today, Tony Coffman, Director of Corporate Performance Management at Perficient. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you, Juliet, and thank you for all the attendees on our webinar today. As Juliet mentioned, I'm a Director in Corporate Performance Management at Perficient. I've been with Perficient 8.5 years, and also had, additional years in corporate performance management and 7 years in ERP and business intelligence. In my role at Perficient, I advise companies on CPM strategy, business process design, and program management across their CPM initiatives. And I've had the privilege of working with many different organizations and industries over my career. One of the things that I really like about CPM is that I get a lot of satisfaction out of solving the unique problems in this space. It seems like each year brings new technologies, new accounting standards, and new perspectives on the function of finance, and just great interest to me. So the idea for this webinar was to take some time at the beginning of the calendar year to report out on the leading trends in CPM. Hopefully it helps focus the conversation in your company, maybe inform how you spend your time investigating these trends, whether that's through product demos, industry conferences, or special projects. And I may learn some things along the way in your poll responses. I look forward to seeing those. Before we go much further, I would like to point out that I, do have specializations in Perficient as a partner with a couple vendors. Specifically, we're a platinum partner with Oracle and a gold partner with OneStream. The intent of this webinar is to be sort of vendor agnostic, but I'm sure I'll refer to certain products and trends in Oracle and OneStream, but they apply to other CPM vendors as well. So just taking a look at our topics. So we're going to talk about strategy, and that being a trend, speed to value, AI, ML, bots, and RPA, and I'll describe what those mean. User experience and trends in that area, enterprise data governance, what I call making unicorns, and CPM beyond finance. So I'll turn it back to Juliet for our first poll question.
Okay. First polling question. What are the biggest challenges you are facing in your current CPM processes? You can check all that apply. Accuracy, time wasted tracking data in Excel, lack of visibility into process, incomplete information, internal resource constraints, or too many concurrent projects. Make sure you press the submit button when you are done checking off your answers. Give about 10 seconds. Okay, Tony, here are the results.
Okay, thank you. So almost a little more than half of respondents talked about accuracy and time wasted tracking data in Excel. Incomplete information is also right up there. So I think when we talk about enterprise data governance, we can cover some of these topics and some of these challenges. So interesting. Thank you. So moving on to our next slide, strategy. So, you know, clearly cloud and software as a service and new developments in technology are all the rage right now. And you might be wondering, well, how does that apply to strategy? Isn't strategy always important? And I'd say, yes, it is always important. However, I think that with the sort of revolution in the architectures of these softwares, it becomes even more important. You know, really, we're at an inflection point in the market. There is a, you know, rapidly increasing trend towards software as a service in the CPM space. You know, there's going to be an eventual retirement of the on-premise sort of editions of these applications. And really, you've got to make sure that you're not putting the cart before the horse, so to speak, and choosing a cloud vendor before you've actually identified what the goals are, right? They may be technical, they may be functional, they may be specific, you know, KPIs and strategic decisions in the organization to align you for where you think your industry is going, where you think the market's going. So putting that strategic assessment before the decisions about technology, I think, is even more important than it's ever been. You know, the question is always, well, how can we achieve what we want to do within, let's say, a new cloud product, a new CPM suite, and meet the deadlines? How will we support it and when? All those decisions really follow really the definition of your goals, and really, you know, we're shortchanging the process if you're not doing these strategic assessments before that. Just this past month, we've completed 6 of these, and you know, not coincidentally around the beginning of the year, as you know, our clients are setting up for what they want to do in the future. So what does that really mean in terms of an assessment or an engagement? At Perficient, we call it a financial process optimization engagement. It's meant to assess the CPM functions within your organization. We want to definitely assess the maturity of different processes. We use about 70 different focus areas to essentially cover a very broad spectrum of functions in the corporate performance management area. How we go about these assessments starts with, again, getting input, right? Getting interviews with stakeholders that can be done a variety of different ways: 360-degree reviews, surveys, online surveys, or in-person surveys. You know, sort of the Olympic judge model, where if you want to sort of get key stakeholders in a room, give them sort of a scorecard, talk about the focus areas, and see who ranks performance well in certain areas or not so well in other areas. It can be as simple as that. What's interesting about that sort of model is, you know, people have to defend their perspectives, right? And it gets good discussion, and it leads to better outcomes as far as these FPOs go. You know, these can be very broad. You can cover all 70 topics and do that fairly quickly. You know, we've done some in as short as 3 weeks. Other times, you want to focus in on key areas and go intensively and deep in those areas. And we've had engagements that last up to 6 months in this regard. So ultimately, you know, you want to identify really what are the pain points and opportunities, review best practices and technologies at at that point in time, and rank these opportunities of value versus effort. At the end of the day, if you're going to the board or to other stakeholders in your company asking for more OpEx, specifically if you're talking about software as a service, you want to have a very solid business case about how you're going to execute that and what value you're going to get out of it. So this is an example of a deliverable out of these types of assessments, right? You've got essentially a scatter plot of initiatives in the finance function, ranked from high effort to low effort, high value to low value, and there's really, it should go without saying that you shouldn't focus on any of the high effort, low value areas. Some of them immediately get eliminated, others percolate up to the top. You want to target the high value initiatives, but yet still be realistic about what you can accomplish in what sort of time frame. Another thing that these types of assessments help do for you is identify what's an early win, right? An early win that can show some value and help fund the next initiative, the next phase of your CPM initiatives. So moving on, the next trend we want to talk about is speed to value, right? This is certainly something that has developed due to the move to the cloud, due to vendors putting more into their products. Their products are still sort of open platforms. They're not, vertical specific in many cases, at least the major vendors. And this is just a quote from Gartner as far as how many companies will be moving towards improving the accuracy and actionability of financial planning and operational data. Right, 75% are undertaking this or will have undertaken it by 2020. 25% are looking to have more closely linked operational and financial planning processes. I'd say by 2020 I would expect more than 25% to be doing this, but that's Gartner's opinion. So what does that really mean? How do you get more speed or more value more quickly? And really it's a function of the vendors putting more into the products in terms of solutions and accelerators. Right, so this is just an example diagram of how across many functions in the organization there are purpose-built solutions tied in an integrated framework to really manage a lot of different business domains and processes, from planning and forecasting to financial close, all the way to compliance and account reconciliations and so forth. So what makes it faster to deploy these? Well, first of all, we're speaking specifically about the cloud, well, it's always on, right? It's always on the latest release. There's less infrastructure to worry about, less investment in that area from a training perspective and maintenance perspective. Another way is the licensing has become more simplified over time. We're now seeing bundles of sort of cloud licensing where you can select between a basic and a premier edition, right? So you're getting multiple modules for a single license for an end user, and choosing to start anywhere, right? Start at the most high value area that was identified in your assessment. For one customer, that might be planning and costing. For another customer, that might be account recs and external filings. There's nothing to prevent you from starting anywhere, really. So the other sort of speed to value aspect of this is the integration between these modules, right? There's commonly got different dimensionality in their cubes or their data models, but they're being aggregated and shared between them and always linked. And that's key when you're talking about accuracy and responsiveness to requests from management, that you can quickly aggregate these models, yet drill down to the lowest level of detail. Another thing that is becoming common in the industry is just the rapid release cycles, right? Rather than try to have a very, what I would say, broad and comprehensive platform that's, hasn't gone through necessary testing, the vendors are rolling out functionality over time, right? So sort of the quality is going in before the name is going on. And that's a stark difference to where we were, 5 years ago, where, the product still had sort of interoperability problems, right? You would spend long cycles with the vendors and support tickets. These are I can say that, on our engagements, we're seeing a much faster cycle time with the vendor on support requests, and I think it has a lot to do with the better and more controlled release cycles. And lastly, I guess the relational and OLAP blending is certainly making it possible to deliver more solutions out of the same platform. And that could be a topic all on its own, but has certainly been a trend in the industry to make this more seamless for system integrators and for customers to take advantage of. So I'll stop there and we'll go to our next poll. Juliet, do you want to read those?
Yep, thank you, Tony. Okay, second polling question. What are the top reasons your organization is considering a CPM initiative? Cost savings, improving the finance process, external reporting requirements, mergers and acquisitions, modernized legacy CPM solution, change in ERP for chart of accountants, not considering a CPM initiative at this time. Please remember to submit your responses. We'll give about 10 seconds for this second polling question. Okay, Tony, here are the results.
Okay, thank you. So improving the finance process is always, it seems, a key concern, and certainly speaks to the sort of the strategic assessments that and the value you might be getting out of those types of things. There's always improvements, especially, and it's just a function of change within your organization, change in the personnel, change in the direction of what management wants to do. But the finance process is always sort of ripe for improvement. Interesting that change in the ERP is not a huge driver. Also not considering a CPM initiative. That's interesting. External reporting requirements, also not a key driver. Okay. Well, thanks for those responses. So let's talk a little bit about what types of technologies and trends are driving some improvements in finance processes. And I'll start with these terms: AI, ML, bots, and RPA. So I think it's always interesting that there's really few topics that generate as much excitement and fear among finance people as artificial intelligence. It's a term that's thrown around loosely. There's lots of hyperbole and different terms in the market. You hear things like signal detection. You hear things like root cause analysis or Internet of Things. In addition to sort of the acronyms on the screen. And it's like, well, how does this really apply, and how far out is this? How deep has this really penetrated sort of the industry? And I think it's first you got to start with, okay, what are we talking about, right? Let's talk about artificial intelligence. And this is an example of a little bit of hyperbole out there. 30% of a financial analyst's time is spent doing manual reports using Excel. Not sure where the 30% number came from, but according to Mark Hurd, using AI, reports become error-free and more insightful. Okay, if we're going to believe that, we at least want to drill into, well, what is AI? AI is, again, a broad term, and it really speaks to machines mimicking human cognitive functions, right? Things like learning, problem solving, communicating, and emotional intelligence. Artificial intelligence can be extremely complex, extremely sophisticated, and there's a long way to go in our artificial intelligence. The more likely scenario is that things like machine learning, or ML, is in your future and is already in certain applications that you use today. For example, machine learning is pretty well adopted in industries like telecom and financial services, things like fraud detection. Simple example is you're entering expenses into Concur, and it alerts you to a possible duplicate, right? Or you get a text message from your bank alerting you to fraud. So machine learning is prevalent, and it's useful. Bots are bits of code, and I'll just go back again to this slide. Bots are bits of code that work autonomously behind the scenes to discover, promote, categorize, or trigger processing. Bots are also prevalent. How deep they really penetrate the accounting and finance function remains to be seen, but I know there's a trend towards this. And then robotic process automation, or RPA. You could think of this as really recording human activities that will be later be performed by a machine. And really across all of these areas, it's probably machine learning and RPA which will have most of the impact in finance and accounting. This is another graphic from McKinsey. You may have seen this before, but it really nicely illustrates at least their opinion of where these types of technologies will have a role. General accounting operations could be very heavily automated by these technologies over time. But if we look at sort of the corporate performance management functions of controlling and external reporting, tax, financial planning analysis, this is less certain, right? This is a more of a gray area, and there's more human interaction, social collaboration required to get these done in a reasonable amount of time and with any sort of accuracy. So the question is, when, right, and how? How do these technologies surface in CPM, and what is the trends? And some of them are underway. I think you can expect to see predictive analytics getting more and more developed and more use over time. You see things like narrative commentary for MD&A and external filings. Repetitive tasks, things like pulling source data into Excel, pivoting it, transforming it, saving it somewhere, those types of things that you need a short-term solution for until more sophisticated automation is made or the data is cleansed in a different way. The vendors are starting to include some of this machine learning into the performance scaling, into the tuning of the architectures behind the scenes. You see in business intelligence tools and CPM the beginnings of natural language processing, like you see with Siri and Cortana and Alexa, being able to interact with softwares with voice commands. Machine learning is also able to identify data anomalies, right? Duplicates, missing values, formulas that are in a certain range of the tool that don't match other formulas in that same area. Data insights, as somebody's planning or as somebody's putting together a report, maybe alerting you to things that you wouldn't have otherwise noticed and should take into account as you're completing a particular activity. And then just automated testing. Obviously, that might be a use for a bot to go do essentially some regression testing against the latest patch that came out. So these are all areas and things that we see today, and it's going to be a continuing trend. But call me a skeptic. I think there's still a huge role for all of us in managing the businesses that we're charged to help manage. Bots can't conduct a quarterly business review. They can't do a zero-based budget. They can't perform due diligence on an acquisition target. Again, these are social endeavors, and it's just the interplay of these assistive technologies with humans that's going to be the trend as we move forward. So the next trend is around user experience, and this is really kind of just the convergence of some of the things that we've seen in our smartphones and in our tablets, making their way into the corporate performance management suite and the way that we use these software tools. It's funny, when we talk about evaluating buying software, this is certainly something that is still driven by human emotions and the decisions around how can we show return. Can our finance or HR or ops generalists use the products? How much coding is required? These are the questions that come into play when we're choosing CPM solutions. And certainly, the vendors are starting with data visualization when they're showing their products, and for good reason. This is an example of just a one-stream dashboard. I'll show you an Oracle dashboard. Finally, a SAP dashboard. Well, what do these have in common? Well, one is you may not even realize that the last one is a BI dashboard, and the first two are in a CPM tool, right? There's almost indistinguishable. They're meant to be concise, interactive, visual. Today, just the fact of having a filter on a screen seems almost archaic. We want these things to be highly interactive. We don't want to have to select a lot of members and options to analyze information. Another reason why visualization is so important is because they're really good at highlighting contrasting data points over a tabular report. There's certainly a place for tabular information, but being able to quickly interact with data and tell data stories, you'll hear that a lot. You're in a meeting. I want to tell a story that's concise, that gets us to a certain decision making. The best way to do that is with these kinds of visualizations. That's just one aspect of user interface design that's sort of making its way into CPM. The other is integration, right? And integration is a big topic. Could be its own sort of webinar, but I wanted to sort of boil it down into what we mean by integration between various systems, right? At the top, as you guys know, in the finance organizations, you're sitting on essentially a mountain of data from a variety of source systems. It's constantly changing, and how do we bring these things together to make sense of it? And it starts with really sort of the model, right? The model, whether that's an Excel or a CPM suite, is going to contain the operating plans, the forecasts, supporting schedules, and the data visualization that I just talked about. And you can have multiple models, right? And in these CPM suites, those models can be linked, and sourcing data from typically a staging area. The staging area used to be sort of outside of the CPM suite, making its way into the CPM suite, being able to do that relational and OLAP blending. All right, so at the staging area, you've got your summarized data. It's aggregating content from multiple sources, applying data transformation rules, and it's being, serving as the bridge to the source systems where the smallest grain of information is held. These can be large ERP systems or siloed, billings and contract systems, data warehouses, data lakes, or unstructured data. But and even delimited files. There's still quite a bit of delimited files passed between on-premise solutions and software as a service, cloud solutions. And depending on the vendor, they're taking different approaches to provide that integration. It could be through open standards, URL queries, or it may be, again, this relational and OLAP blending. At the end of the day, you've got the aggregated data for insights in the model, and you don't have to leave that particular CPM suite to get down to the smallest grain of information. The next trend we wanted to talk about is enterprise data governance, right? And we talked about, or in the first poll response, there was, key top of mind item was just accuracy and tracking data in Excel. So enterprise data governance is, its own real domain. The key trend here is again, as companies grow, you've got more sources, more participants, but you're still expected to be very nimble in the finance function. And the question is, well, how do we do that when we have data that's changing all the time? The mantra used to be, well, to manage these systems, you need three things. You need people, you need process, and you need technology. We've all heard that, right? Later, the mantra was extended to say, well, it's people, process, technology, and data, right? You can't assume that you've got the correct information. The data is almost as important as those prior three things. I'd argue that there's an additional piece here that needs to be considered, and that's governance, and that's the trend. You can't assume that the data is going to stay correct. You can't assume that the data is going to come to you in the same format that you're familiar with it today. The reality is we all live in sort of a data, centric world. It's often incomplete. It often needs conversion. It needs enrichment. It's highly sensitive. And for, multitude of reasons, companies that get to a certain size need to really consider enterprise data governance, and it needs to be a repeatable framework. So, how do the CPM suites and what are the trends in these softwares? Where's that headed? Well, it's about validations, right? Validations at every level of interaction, right? Whether that's a master data request and all of its attributes, whether that's loading data into the CPM suite, transforming it with mapping rules, or whether you're collecting data through forms, through Excel, being able to apply things like combo edits or intersection validation, making sure that data is not going into the wrong places, into the wrong combinations. Also being able to view complete change history and supporting details and drill to source, right? Being able to do version control. What if scenarios, approvals and workflows, making sure that if for whatever reason the data isn't correct, you can roll back to a prior version, right? Security audits, being able to have in the box, in the CPM suite itself, all the necessary reports to satisfy all the particulars around security. SOC 1, SOC 2 reports, simple role, user role definitions. These are things that you don't have to query some database for. They're built into the tools and easy for finance to get access to. Enterprise data governance is also concerned with change control, right? Making sure that you have a test, dev, and a prod, that you're following good, promotion practices and approvals. So when we talk about enterprise data governance, we're also, still kind of want to come back to the integration question, right? How are your source systems being integrated into the cloud or into your CPM suite? Are you able to use a direct adapter? Are you transferring a delimited file? Is it encrypted at rest? Is it encrypted in transit? This is definitely top of mind for all the vendors to make sure that all of these areas are covered, and it's going to be a continuing trend going forward that if finance is expected to run the systems, they should also be afforded the tools to provide good data governance over the process. And that's, I think, an important function for finance to bring, right? If you're ultimately responsible for reporting the results and making predictions, you also want to be in control of the data and how it's getting to you. So we'll stop there and we'll take another poll. This one's on enterprise data governance.
All right, third polling question. If I had to choose one area of enterprise data governance to improve at my organization, it would be, you can just select one response, creating a clear, repeatable framework for enterprise data governance, the initiation and approval of new master data, sharing and transforming master data across systems, data completeness, alignment and cleansing, security roles, authentication and timely access to information, process automation, ability to respond to internal and external audit requests. Give about 10 to 15 seconds for the third polling question. Okay, Tony, here are the results.
Okay, thank you. So it looks like top of mind is just having the framework in place, and that's somewhat not surprising. I would expect that we've got participants from organizations of different sizes, different maturity in this area, but definitely having sort of a well-documented and repeatable process is important and certainly needs review from time to time as the underlying and business changes or the underlying architecture of how data is moving around changes. It looks like next on the list is data completeness, alignment, and cleansing. So just making sure that when we marry up data from different places, it's aligned, and we can navigate sort of across systems. Less important is security and master data. It's interesting. It's interesting to me on the master data question because, in our industry, it seems like this is, initiating master data is, done in a variety of different systems. However, aligning them across systems is sometimes difficult. Having the necessary trees and hierarchies is oftentimes calls for a purpose-built tool for that, and that's usually one of the tools within these suites. So we'll move on to the next trend number 5 here, if you will, is what I call making unicorns. And really, as we see, CPM moving further into the cloud, there's almost a necessary, adjustment to hiring and org structures. How you execute the projects might be very similar, but how you support them ongoing is changing. I find myself often writing letters of recommendation to engineers, the software engineers that want to go get their MBA, or I'm talking to finance professionals who ask me, what kind of vendor certification should I get, or online technical training should I do, and I'm happy to advise them. But I think it just speaks to the trend of sort of the merger or convergence of sort of this techno-functional role in our industry. For many finance leaders, the prospect of becoming more technical doesn't really interest them, but to effectively run these systems, this is an important role, and it's oftentimes tough to find this quote-unquote unicorn, but sort of the trend is to have a framework in place to sort of make them, right? So what do I mean by a unicorn? What I mean is, if this was the classic, project execution framework, where you've got a steering committee, you've got a system integrator or partner helping you implement, you've got, a client project manager, got a client technical architect, and then you've got some technical roles of, maybe a database lead, an integration lead, a security lead, and then on the business side, both on the partner side and the client side, you've got the business domain leads with the delivery teams behind them. That everything bounded in the box might have been an IT function, right? As more features are added to these CPM suites, things that make it easier to do integrations, things that make it easier to do master data and enterprise data governance and security, these roles again tend to converge into what you could call the new finance manager, the new finance analyst, or the new sort of systems administrator, right, where they've got to have technical proficiency, they've got to have the business domain expertise, and they've got to be familiar with integrations and data transformations. Now, again, this depends on the complexity. This still could be, at least if we're talking about integration, still an IT function. But, when you're running these systems, the partner has left, you're left behind with the solution. How do you run it, right? You run it with, people that have a broad array of skills and need to have a broad array of skills, or you're not going to realize the full value of that tool over time, right? So in the job description, it's a lot of things. It's accounting and finance background. It's interpersonal skills. They've got to know, again, business processes and data transformation. You may ask them to modify the application, and they've got to consider, well, what's, the user interface design is important, right? How do people, interact with the tool? Am I making it easy enough for them? Obviously, they've got to have some numeracy and be able to work quickly with numbers, understand numbers, and they've got to have the technical aptitude and continuous learning. So, this is, again, as IT moves more into the function of hosting architecture, maybe doing the enterprise data governance and security, and being a service organization to the business, the business is taking more on their shoulders of actually maintaining these applications. And to do that, it takes, a fairly broad array of skills. So how do you sort of make the unicorn, if you will? Well, It's having a program of skill development within your organization that can be a variety of things. It can be, again, the classic things of encouraging people to get their CPA or get technical certifications, but also enabling them with things like online training. So the trend is in the CPM suite having a fair bit of sort of online videos and documentation available as part of the subscription, right? So that you, whether that's 1, 5, or 10 individuals that need to gain these skills, they've got access directly online in the tool. They can be self-directed, or they can follow a guided path set by the vendor. There's still a need for sort of those in-person and virtual classes, and it's maybe a deeper level of training, followed by the classic custom training that are being developed for administrators or end users on your applications, right? So again, depends on where people are starting from and where they need to go to sort of expand into this new sort of finance manager role. But certainly has, certainly when they're on staff, progress is made on projects. You get sort of better completion on projects. And when they leave, it's a tough replacement. So, having these frameworks in place is important. Finally, you can't do it all. So sometimes, it's important to have some type of managed support in place. That could be because of downsizing in your IT department, due to turnover for whatever reason. You just can't, get access to all the skills you need on a, full-time employee. This is where partners and vendors are offering managed support that's customized to your level of need. Again, customized to the size of your organization, from simply first tier or second tier support to full outsourcing. As customers move to the cloud, they're also seeing the need that I need an always-on support organization, just like I've got the always-on tools. And these are factoring more and more into sort of our space. The last trend I wanted to talk about is CPM beyond finance. And you might have heard this before, but we're going to start with a poll question, our final poll question. And it's around beyond finance.
Okay. Our last polling question today. We are actively using our CPM suite to support the following departments and functions. You can check all that apply: strategy and finance, sales and marketing, product or service development, human resources, procurement and supply chain, information technology, or other services. Make sure to submit your responses. Okay. Here are the results, Tony.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting, almost in order of how these are used. So strategy and finance, obviously. Sales and marketing next. It's like information technology, maybe IT budgeting, project portfolio management, those types of things. Not so much on product or service development. Well, let's talk about what we see in our practice and see if any of this resonates with the audience. So I'm sure you're all well aware, there's an explosion of sort of SaaS vendors and solutions out there in the marketplace. This is just a small sampling of things that our clients have considered or have replaced with CPM solutions. The question every time a new solution is presented to you, I'm sure is well, is it going to work with our other systems? How do we support it? Should we buy an open platform or should it be a vertical solution? Is it secure? That's still a hot topic. Can we single sign in or sign on between these solutions? And do we need a purpose-built solution for single sign-on? The reality is not all organizations and not all IT departments can support 20, 30, 40 different solutions. And so, the trend is, and as these CPM suites expand in their capabilities, the trend is to get and extract more value out of them. You've got multiple cubes, multiple applications, multiple instances, and there's more and more use cases for the CPM suite. I'll just give you a couple of examples here where we've had a customer who had a high turnover in their field operations due to essentially pennies on the dollar in terms of the wages. They see slightly higher wage and move to the next kind of shop down the street. And our client said, well, we've got this really great reporting tool. We can analyze it by different dimensions. Can we just use it to do total compensation reporting? And the answer is yes. So we source data from SuccessFactors and Dayforce and some other systems to essentially do a total compensation report that was a real hit in the HR department. Able to batch and burst out reports by region or by location, by department, and enable them to do quarterly reviews with employees, or I should say, if necessary, or annual reviews to show them what their total comp really was. And it definitely has changed the trend in their turnover rates. Other examples are in operations doing production planning, right, or store planning. It's driven by schedules. They're often very fluid models. What's the new store number? What's the new well number? What's the new machine number? And when are they going online? How do we ramp them up? These are things that CPM tools can do that would have been quite a challenge, several years ago. Our customers are tending to turn towards the CPM as a means to have, again, linked data and drive more value to other departments than just finance. It means, at the end of the day, lower maintenance and training costs, shared master data and shared hierarchies between departments, and just fewer transformations of data and less maintenance. So, I guess in conclusion, these are the top 7 trends that I see, and I expect them to continue, and certainly appreciate the poll responses, and I think that's helped inform my perspective on some of these. I want to go ahead and, I guess, turn it back to Juliet for questions. See that we've got a few minutes left, and Juliet, I've got plenty of time if we need to go over.
Okay, great. So we're now at Q&A. If anyone has a question, feel free, please, to submit it in the Q&A box. So we have a first question here, Tony, to please explain what a bot is.
Yeah, so a bot, again, is a piece of code that runs behind the scenes, often mining through data sets or unstructured data that essentially short for robot, but can essentially discover patterns in data to trigger, one function to the next. You see this again being talked about in operational accounting, where let's say a bot goes through, let's say your AR table and matches to invoices, right? So the possibilities are endless, and again, typically not something that a finance person would code, but would be set in place on a given system to do the work that a human might have done.
Okay, great. Next question here. We are considering Oracle EPBCS, but not sure if the pre-built modules will work for us. What are some of the pitfalls?
Well, there's a couple, I'd say. The first is the potential for that module to be oversold, if you will. Even if a given pre-built module is very stable and works well for what it does, they aren't exactly unlimited in their features. Obviously the vendors are starting to put in more features with each successive release, but at a point in time when you're implementing these modules, you've got to consider what it's capable of. Larger companies might need things like alternate roll-ups and tiered benefit rates, or I don't know, just could easily reach their limits and kind of fall back on Excel for exceptions. I guess that's where partners can help strike a balance between the pre-built module and sort of the build-to-spec model. I'd say the other is workflow. I think going in, we all tend to want that pre-built sort of EPBCS module to handle all the document flow, and personally, I would like to see that improve. I mean, you can do things like adding attachments and creating, let's say, defined approval paths and so on. But I'd like to see more, I guess, business process management added to the tools, where you could link to upstream or downstream systems from a document flow perspective. Things you might see in other transactional systems, like creating a job rec, or creating an AFE, or importing a contract that's on paper. Those types of things still really aren't there. But there's, again, the modules are evolving, and there really is a race to address all the needs of finance with these pre-built modules.
Okay, great. Next question. Our company is extremely protective of salary and benefits data, and it really hinders our labor planning process. What do you typically see when it comes to roles and responsibilities between FP&A and HR over this information?
This is a good question. Very loaded, and one that comes up quite a bit. Well, I'd say clearly compensation has always been sensitive, and there's concerns over privacy, and that they increase almost weekly, it seems. I mean, even if you strip out things like personally identifiable information, finance personnel can still possibly, potentially kind of deduce someone's compensation by the size of the department, or job grades, or other means. I mean, at the end of the day, finance needs to see the data in aggregate, and HR needs to work with the details. I guess when this comes up, I'm most often recommending to invest in HR with the necessary FTEs and licenses and training so they can participate actively in the forecasting process. It seems like so often with this is an issue, HR is understaffed or they're focused on other projects. And, that's when finance, and FP&A gets frustrated, right? You've got your deadlines and, you're forced to resort to sort of manual processes when something could be better integrated and, a better business process. But, ultimately, it's sensitive info. And as companies grow in complexity, you've got, more P&L owners, more HR hiring managers, and there really needs to be kind of a split responsibility between HR and finance over this data.
Okay. We have one more question here today. What percentage of your customers are using predictive analytics?
I would say it's still a relatively small percentage, maybe on the order of 10%. I think probably for two reasons. One, I think there's a basic need for planners, that are trying to make, a prediction or a projection to be able to explain the result and control the result, especially when there may be compensation or, standing in the organization, is visible. I think the predictive tools that are in the CPM suites right now are relatively lightweight. There's statistical analysis. It's not full on, artificial intelligence and machine learning. Maybe as it gets more sophisticated, it could get more accurate, but then the challenge becomes, well, how did it come up with that answer? For now, I see, finance managers and planners using predictive analytics more for comparison's sake, to what I would call the traditional top-down, bottoms-up approach to forecasting. Until, again, the predictive analytics gets more accurate and that can be kind of verified over multiple cycles, I think it's still sort of just a comparison tool.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much, Tony. I think, Tony, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I was just saying thank you for the questions.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Tony. So this marks the end of our webinar today. This slide I will keep on the screen. Here are some upcoming events in the upcoming months at Perficient. So right here on this slide I'll keep up on the screen. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Please remember to download your certificate from the certification widget in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We look forward to you all joining us on future webinars. You can find information about upcoming webinars in the resources widget. If you have any questions regarding CPE credits, please feel free to email cpe@financialexecutives.org. Have a wonderful day, and again, thank you to Tony Coffman.
Thank you.
And I